I don't know whether a lot of the listeners know that hydrogen that produced by nuclear is called pink hydrogen, which I found it quite adorable.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
fact that people associate nuclear with this, scary technology, but the hydrogen is produced called the pink hydrogen. So I feel like
Okay.
quite contradicting, which is
Yeah.
adorable.
There's a whole hydrogen rainbow.
Hello and welcome to Green Shift, where we try to make sense of sustainability. I'm your host, David Austin, and I'm joined by my co hosts, Dr. Victor Nian, founding co chairman of the Center for Strategic Energy and Resources, CSER, and Jordan Kronen, policy wonk and Green Shift executive producer. Today, we're joined by Hasliza Omar, a PhD candidate in energy security at the University of New South Wales, with a strong background in both the oil and gas and nuclear sectors. Haslisa's research explores the geopolitics of energy and the security risks and opportunities of the clean energy transition. She's especially interested in how emerging technologies like green steel are reshaping global power dynamics. So, in this discussion, we're going to dive into the strategic race for green steel, its role in decarbonizing heavy industry, and what it means for Southeast Asia and beyond. Welcome, Hasliza.
Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us. I understand you're another one of Victor's many, many contacts in this sector. Could you start maybe just telling us a bit how you and Victor know each other and what you've worked on together?
I think the mutual contacts that we have with each other, I think it was Mark Nelson. He was talking about nuclear in Australia, and then I was approached by him asking that, hey, you've been quite active in the nuclear sector and also the nuclear conversation in Australia. So, do you think that you can contribute to the discussion in Singapore? And then that's when I know Victor from.
I know Hasliza's work in nuclear energy, which is really amazing. And I think that
Thank you.
connection between Singapore and Australia really makes the stuff interesting. You have a crazy project, if I have to call it a crazy project, of more than 5,000 kilometers cable from north of Darwin all the way to Singapore. Uh,
Mhm.
where do I get 5,000? 4,700 kilometers under the sea,
Yeah. Mhm.
500 onshore. So that's more than
Mhm.
5,000 kilometers of cable to bring solar energy to Singapore. So the idea is why not nuclear? Why it has to be solar? And
Well, the
that's
fact that the ownership change from the first guy to the second guy, that kind of raised some suspicious red flag of if it's that good, then the project could go ahead. But the fact that it changed the ownership of the project, it screams something. But I'm just not gonna comment further on that.
Right. Well, we can just spot the little red flag and people can investigate on their own. Today, we're going to talk about things like green steel. What exactly is green steel and how is it different from traditional steel?
Okay, so green steel is made using low carbon or carbon free technologies to reduce environmental impact. And the key difference lies in how the steel is made. So, traditionally, steel is made through two main routes. So, one is, I'm going to get it right with it's quite tongue twister, blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace. So, it is used to make primary steel from raw material like iron ore. And the second one is the electric arc furnace used for making secondary steel by recycling scrap. So for the blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace, think of this as two-step process, hence the name blast furnace and the basic oxygen furnace. So blast furnace, so imagine you have a giant industrial melting pot. So you add iron ore, coke, and limestone, and you're fed into this massive wok and hot air is blasted in, causing the coke to burn and produce carbon monoxide. This carbon monoxide reacts with iron ore, separating oxygen and leaving behind molten iron. So at this stage, this molten iron is quite brittle, so you can't really apply for any steel application. And that's when it go to the second process, which is the basic oxygen furnace. So this molten iron goes into this furnace called converter. Pure oxygen is blown at supersonic speed to burn off impurities and excess carbon. And as a result, you get molten crude steel, which later can turn into slabs or ingots or roll into products like bars, wires, and sheets. This method, as you know, because we use coke and we release a lot of carbon monoxide, carbon emission, is very energy intensive, heavily reliant on coal, and making like a huge source for carbon dioxide emission. And the second route, which is called the electric arc furnace, it is more sustainable because you use recycling scrap. And also another furnace. So you imagine a big furnace, you put all the scraps that you get from old cars, demolished buildings, putting into this wok, and graphite electrodes comes in, and then you run a powerful electric current that melt the scrap at temperatures up to 3500 degrees Celsius, and the molten steel then refined and shipped into a new products. So this is a lot more cleaner because the primary energy source electricity, which means we have fewer emission than the traditional blast furnace basic oxygen furnace method. So because of this, if the electricity comes from renewable energy source, the steel produced can be a lot cleaner, and this is where the green hydrogen comes into the picture if we want to further decarbonize the steel making. Hence the name green steel. Yeah.
So could you dive a little bit more into the green hydrogen? Because it's my understanding that in order to get those temperatures to produce green steel, you need something like a thermal energy source like hydrogen. And traditional renewable energy like solar or wind is not able to produce that level of heat.
Hydrogen can help us to make steel in a cleaner way by replacing coal in the iron making step. This is because when hydrogen reacts with iron ore, it produces water vapor instead of carbon dioxide, which is why it doesn't need that the same level of high temperature as coal. But the thing is, how clean the process is depends on hydrogen is made. Most hydrogen today comes from natural gas using a method called steam method reforming, which is SMR. These create what is called as gray hydrogen. Still emits a lot of carbon dioxide, but not as much as the traditional approach of the blast furnace basic oxygen furnace. So, in order for us to truly decarbonize steel, the hydrogen should come from renewable energy like solar and wind power that used to split water in a process called electrolysis. These create green hydrogen with almost zero emission. So it's the same type of hydrogen process, but a lot cleaner because you don't use fossil fuel to generate those electricity. So that's where the green steel coming from the contribution of green hydrogen.
I'm a bit confused, so let me make sure I understand this. The two basic processes that you talked about, the first one, like the blast furnace, in that instance, you're talking about directly changing the fuel which is used on site, right? Like the coal, and replacing that with green hydrogen, ideally, correct? And then the other form that uses the electric arc, melting the scrap, that's an electric current that comes from the electric grid.
Electricity.
Yeah, which hopefully the grid is being powered by renewables in some way.
Yep. Yeah. So electric arc furnace, it can be powered from non-renewable electricity and also renewable electricity. It doesn't really matter. But if you want to make it clean, then those energy sources has to come from low carbon energy source.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. I'm starting to understand. Thank you for that explanation. Victor, what do you think so far? Is there anything you want to add to this explanation?
Yeah, I think it's important to really so-called demystify the idea of green steel. A lot of people are thinking about green steel in a different way. Of course, iron and steel is considered a hard-to-abate sector, but with hydrogen, this could change. So that's actually, what I want to add is the nuclear dimension. So when the finally we have the so-called generation 4 reactors. So this is where you look at high temperature reactor, which then can really reach the temperature range for steel or iron smelting. So that could also replace the heat source or the blast furnace that Hasliza has mentioned. So with that high temperature heat, what you could do is also to eliminate the step of hydrogen making. So you could use directly the industrial heat from these generation 4 high temperature reactors safely and to produce steel. And then, of course, you could use alternative feedstocks as the reactive agent in the steel making process. So that's where you can consider hydrogen, or maybe just using carbon, because that's the most intuitive feedstock to do
Yep.
to make steel anyway. And it can make steel with special properties, and that's why we need carbon for that.
Yeah, nuclear is a lot versatile because it can provide, as Victor said, industrial heat, but it also has another pathway where you can use nuclear to produce hydrogen. And I don't know whether a lot of the listeners know that hydrogen that produced by nuclear is called pink hydrogen, which I found it quite adorable.
Mhm.
The fact that people associate nuclear with this, scary technology, but the hydrogen is produced called the pink hydrogen. So I feel like quite
Okay.
contradicting, which is
Yeah.
adorable.
There's a whole hydrogen rainbow, green, blue, gray,
Yes.
pink. There's yellow as well.
Yes.
It's a whole thing. We should do an episode on that at some point.
We can.
I always joke about that. Whenever you see the different colors of hydrogen, then I go colorblind.
Hey, but Victor, that model that you talk about where you're using like the industrial heat from nuclear in the steel making process, is that just theoretical or is that in practice anywhere?
Well, it has not been demonstrated yet, but for the benefits of doubt, if you look into the engineering and look into the physics of it, in principle, that'll work. So what is really happening right now? So in China, there is a high temperature gas cooled reactor. It's using pebble bed module. So in short, it's called HTRPM. That's what it's best known for. Initially, it was planned to support industrial activities. So there, they can reach the temperature of 1,000 degrees. So that at that level, you can do a lot of work, and iron and steel easily, you can easily support those industries. But the challenge is that even though from a technical standpoint, you could use nuclear reactor or the heat from nuclear reactor to support these industries. In reality, it is not just about technology that can make things work. You also need all the other support, for example, regulations. Right now, there is no safety regulation that governs the use of nuclear energy beyond power application. So in reality, no countries are able to take a strong reference to say, now I can license my reactor specifically for industrial applications. So that's what's posing a great challenge. This is not so much of a technical complexity, it's more of a safety considerations. And also because the regulations haven't reached that stage, you couldn't do that. But the closest application, I would say, right now in China, is that they are using nuclear reactor for district heating. So in northern part of China, it gets cold in winter. So what they do is, in the traditional way, they will use coal-fired boilers just to boil water, raise the water temperature to about 70 degrees, and then they will transmit this water through it's like a thermal grid, basically a hot water pipe. Right? And then these water pipes then run through the different residential houses, condos and stuff, and provide space heating for us. I think one of the demonstration project now is already commercial. They are using nuclear reactor as the heat source to replace the coal-fired boilers. So in principle, yes, you could use nuclear reactor just for the heating purpose rather than for power. But at a high temperature, 1,000 degrees, the regulations is not there yet.
If I want to add to that, because nuclear technology is also known for its ability to co-generate, where it provide industrial heat and also electricity at the same time. But as Victor said, it's because of the regulation that makes it challenging for that to be commercialized fully.
Yeah, I was wondering, why do you think the regulation hasn't been implemented, or why any progress has not been made on that front?
Okay, so that's a good question, Jordan. If you look at the operational nuclear power plant in the world today, almost 99% of them are light water reactors, or 95%, not too extreme, right? And even though, whether the light water reactors or whatever reactor you see, they are all designed for power generation. So there is a limit on what is the temperature level at which the reactor operates. Those were set by physical limit of nuclear materials. Because in power generation, we are dealing with water, and water itself is a coolant. So think of nuclear power generation not as driving commercial activities, but first to make sure the nuclear reactor can be safely operated. So you need a lot of water to cool it. In the event of an accident, you also need substantial amount of water to maintain the core temperature, make sure there's no meltdown, there's no thermal runaway, and you won't have a Fukushima kind of consequence. So that is why in this whole process, the regulators, the IAEA, all know very well how to regulate the safety of nuclear power. And in the event something happens, we also understand what to do in EPR, emergency preparedness and response. However, now Generation 4 is coming up. Although gas-cooled reactors is not new, in the UK, in the US, and in Germany, actually, there are gas-cooled reactors. I mean, that's been operating for the longest. Of course, the argument about high maintenance costs, also the use of graphite is also increasing the cost. But in either case, these are reactors that can go up the temperature levels, maybe going to 400, 500, maybe 600 degrees. The high temperature reaction that the Chinese has developed can go up to theoretically 1,000 degrees, but I think right now it's around maybe 800. At this level, you can say first of a kind that is in operation in the world. And because the regulation generally lags behind technology development, so it's natural that the regulation hasn't come to a stage to regulate the safety of these high temperature reactors beyond power application.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think, and also to add to Victor, and correct me if I'm wrong, but another challenge of why it's taking so long for the regulator to regulate whether you can do industrial heat or anything else is that the reactor design itself is not really streamlined. So it depends on the geographic location of what happened to the waste and where we're going to install the reactors. And adding to that, the regulation of that specific countries when it comes to building a nuclear power plant, even though they use general requirement or guidelines set up by the IAEA, but when it comes to countries, it's a lot more specific towards the context of that countries. So in terms of reactor design, safety measures, what is the size of the emergency preparedness and its radius if something happened, each of these varies according to countries, which makes it when it's not streamlined, it takes longer because it's like you're looking at customized licensing, customized operational capability of all of these reactors. Is that correct, Victor? I
Yeah.
think from my understanding.
Yeah. So that's correct. I mean, Generation 4 to most people is still a dream, although there is one that's in operation, one and only one. So yes, there's no standardization in design, and hence it's also difficult to come up with the proper regulations. If you use the traditional regulation to regulate these high temperature reactors, by the way, they are small modular reactors, right? So it's also of a different kind. If you use the traditional large reactor regulation to regulate these SMRs, you might eventually run into a problem which you also see a cost escalation because the regulation, the safety standards are not compatible with the business model of these SMRs. In the end, it causes a problem with some people continue to accuse that nuclear energy is just not economical.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it sounds like then using the nuclear for the industrial heat portion of steel generations a bit farther down the road as a possibility. So let's get back to just steel production in general and asking you, tell me more about, what makes steel such an important sector to decarbonize?
So steel is known to be one of the largest industrial carbon emitters globally. It accounts approximately around 7 to 11% of global carbon dioxide emission. And this is because it comes from the conventional process that intensely relied on coal. And not only that, like our economies rely heavily on steel. And this demand is further heightened by the steel is essential role in the energy transition because technologies such as solar panels, wind turbine, electric vehicles, all of them require steel. So this demand of steel is not going to go down anytime soon. It's going to go up and up. And because of this, it's really important to find ways on how to decarbonize a commodity that is known to be energy intensive and carbon intensive.
Very clear. Okay, got it. Uh, that part I understand. Yeah, that was a little bit more understandable. Okay, now let's talk about kind of the geopolitical and energy security issues that surround all of this, because Even though green steelmaking has the potential to tackle the emissions, we know there's a lot of other challenges that go beyond this. So tell us about what are some of these challenges in the broader sense?
The traditional process of making steel, you can use the existing iron ore because that has been done for so many years. But as we are transitioning to making green steel, then that means it need a specific type of high grade iron ore. Uh, and it can be found currently a few places globally, like Brazil and Guinea. So these changes who holds the power in the iron ore market could lead to new challenges in getting enough supply and potentially higher prices. So it's the same thing as we see in terms of the competitive market of getting ore for cobalt, for nickel, for copper. So iron ore is entering that market now where you need a specific high grade iron ore for you to produce green steel with um, steel making technologies that use hydrogen.
Mm.
So that is the geopolitical side of it. But in terms of the energy security side of it, knowing that you need a huge and constant supply of green hydrogen, which means you need to have a significant amount of renewable electricity, which isn't always available everywhere. And I'm talking at this scenario provided if a country like Australia doesn't have any nuclear power plant, and they rely, if they want to produce green hydrogen, they have to rely on 100% renewable. So if I'm talking about other countries that has nuclear power plants such as China, so that scenario might be a bit different. But for country who doesn't have any other alternative energy sources apart from renewables, you need a significant amount of renewable electricity to produce that hydrogen, which means that you need to build massive new infrastructure to produce, move, and store hydrogen. And this create another set of big challenges for investment, logistic, and keeping our energy grid stable.
I mean, what is Australia doing right now? Because I remember seeing like there was talk about them investing in a lot of this green hydrogen infrastructure. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then what? Yeah,
Yeah.
what happened with that?
Yeah. So recently, so all the policy are looking towards, okay, we want to expedite the retirement of coal-fired power plant, and we're going to build a lot of renewables, and this renewable is being expanded to provide energy for the battery storage community, and then for electric vehicle, and also for producing green hydrogen. It's only recently that the government decided, I think the policy that we made is too ambitious and unrealistic. So now they are slowly backing down and start to consider adding more natural gas in order to bridge that gap. So that's a sign of, that's exactly where the geopolitical energy security comes into play in real life, where you want to produce green steel with green hydrogen, but you realize that the investment, the finance, or even the regulatory process is probably quite slow and not as fast as you think it is. Then you have to back down a little bit and start to go back to probably lesser emission, but it's still emitting carbon emission. But
Mhm.
when you don't have any other choices like
Yeah.
nuclear, then
Mhm.
natural gas is the next option.
Okay, and I won't get into all the Australian politics at this point. And
It's
it's
a
That's for
rabbit
their
hole. It's a
podcast.
rabbit hole. Probably
Yeah.
another podcast.
Yeah,
Yes.
very a very deep rabbit hole, I'm sure. But I'm gonna change the topic just a little bit and talk about carbon border adjustment mechanisms or CBAM. We recently just had a great uh, introduction to CBAM from one of our other guests. Dr. Gupta gave us a really good primer on CBAM. But maybe you could tell us a bit about what exactly does a CBAM do from your perspective, and like how does this apply to green steel making?
Okay, so CBAM definitely a really hot topic, especially in the green steel discussion. It is designed to level the playing field in international trade when it comes to carbon emission. So a simpler way to put it, from my understanding, is CBAM is a carbon tariff or fee on imported goods. Because without CBAM, carbon-intensive industry might simply move their production elsewhere to countries with less strict climate policies to avoid this cost, which means carbon emission is just being shifted elsewhere rather than decreased globally. So importers bringing goods into a country with CBAM, and at this stage it's only EU, but possibly in the long term, other countries might consider CBAM as well. So importers must pay a fee or buy the CBAM certificate. So this cost reflects the carbon emission generated during the imported goods production. And usually it aligns with domestic carbon price set up by the importing country. So this ensures that the price that you pay domestically and being produced organically or in a cleaner way could have a fair advantage with slightly cheaper imported good that is produced elsewhere with cheaper energy source but higher carbon emission.
Again, very clear. Thank you for that. Now, but in looking at Asia and Southeast Asia, what
Mm.
unique challenges and opportunities come up in developing a green steel ecosystem, especially considering emerging policies like a CBAM?
Right. So if I use Singapore as an example, it introduced carbon tax back in 2019. So it positioned itself to lead the low carbon steel adoption in Southeast Asia. And especially people keep bringing out CBAM everywhere. So that's considered like a huge market signal for not just Southeast Asia, but globally, that this probably could be the path towards the future. This is challenging because Singapore mainly imports steel from countries like China and Vietnam. And these suppliers usually have different climate policy, and they're still mostly made using the carbon heavy blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace method that are costly to upgrade. But like I said, because CBAM can act as a huge market signal, this could push the Singapore traders and the suppliers to reduce emission or face tariff, which could strongly encourage greener supply chain. And since Singapore can leverage on its position as a financial hub and its expertise in carbon services, it can help to facilitate this green steel trade.
That matches kind of what Dr. Gupta was saying as well. Victor, what do you think about this? And how close are we to this maybe being implemented?
Yeah, I mean, CBAM has already been implemented. So as of this year, I think 4 sectors has already been applied. CBAM has already applied to the 4 sectors. It's no longer just a signal.
Mhm.
Action
Okay.
in place. So, countries have to find ways to respond. And I think this is twofold. We're trying to avoid or trying to minimize the risks of countries and companies shifting their emissions around. If let's say, if you leave up to the individual countries to put a carbon policy or carbon tax, whatever, you can always move your companies around. But with CBAM, if you want to trade with Europe, then you have to basically reduce your carbon emissions. Doesn't matter which country you operate in. So that's on the brighter side. But the more pessimistic side or the darker side of things is that it is very likely that this will increase the cost of production
Yes.
or the cost of goods from Asia by and
Yeah.
large, because
Mhm.
mostly we are driven by fossil fuels. So if
Mm.
CBAM is then that means that all of the exports from Asia, the price eventually going to the final user or consumer is going to go up. So the question is then, does this still justify a just transition, both from the Asian perspective in terms of competitiveness and just transition in Europe? Because actually we are just increasing the cost of living at the end. Basically, all costs pass down to consumer eventually.
Yeah.
So does that really make sense when CBAM is in place? Or should we actually turn this around and, rather than having CBAM, but maybe having more incentives or more mechanisms to invest in low carbon technology or low carbon transition in Asia, rather than penalizing the exporters? For example, right now, of course, we don't feel much, but once CBAM is applied to all the sectors, a simple chocolate bar in your hand that's made in Asia, simple packs of coffee, made from Asia, is going to cost you 20% more. really willing to accept that, are really willing to pay for that, right? And in some cases, you might not even be able to get certain goods from Asia because simply they're no longer competitive and they can't really enter the European market. So that also leads to a conspiracy. Is that the questions that some people ask: who is CBAM designed for? Is it designed for the world to reduce carbon emission, or is it designed for certain countries to make sure that they don't have an unfair edge in terms of cost, in terms of price competitiveness?
That's where the protectionism conspiracy comes out from. Yeah.
Victor, to your point about who's CBAM designed for, and wouldn't it be better to just open up more investment into carbon-free technologies? I kind of want to pull this back to what Dr. Gupta was saying as well. I think countries that are currently producing steel, say for example, without a carbon tax or very energy intensive, carbon intensive, by them at least starting down the road to try to reduce carbon intensity, that gives them a negotiation point, and that gives them something to try to come back and say, okay, maybe we're not meeting your requirements right now, but let's talk, help us invest in something over here. Isn't that what his point was?
Yeah, that actually, in fact, in climate change, it has always been a negotiation, right? Which is why we have the conference of parties. Yeah, people get together and negotiate on climate deals. But right now, it seems that negotiation is one part, action is one part, individual idealism is one part, and then collective action on a regional basis is another one. So, and of course, you also have countries now that are going away from Paris Agreement. So this is the world that we're living in. Of course, on that note, I mean, if you look at cooperation, Japan has done a really good job in the past decades or so, a couple of decades, I would say, because Japan has a Kyoto commitment. So what Japan did is that they come up with the JCM, or Joint Credit Mechanism. It's very much Japan driven, but it's Japan ASEAN partnership. So what Japan does is to invest in energy transition technologies, energy efficiency, solar, and all that. So what they do is, once they have done that, then they will bring the equivalent carbon reduction offset back to Japan to meet their Kyoto commitment. So of course, some countries and some people would say, this is just eating other people's way of decarbonization, but that's not really true, because actually Japanese companies are investing in decarbonization measures in ASEAN. That's also foreign investment for the ASEAN economy. And at the same time, we are collectively reducing carbon emissions. Yes, on a accounting book, these are going back to Japan, but Japan, ASEAN together, carbon emissions are coming down. So, the way I look at it, this is one of the good examples that we should be learning from, rather than saying, everything that comes at my doorstep, tell me the carbon footprint, and I tell you a capital tax. You pay, you win. You don't pay, you go back. It's not the way to work.
If you had the ear of a policymaker in, let's say, Southeast Asia, what would be some advice to them on how they can navigate that issue?
So I would reckon that if I'm sitting with a policymaker from Southeast Asia, that they need to understand we need something to bridge that cost. Because green steel is currently expensive due to the high cost of new technologies, expensive green hydrogen, and haven't yet been produced at larger scale. So you need policy like CBAM or carbon tax or even financial aid in order to bridge that gap. And the second thing is, we will talk about the securing raw materials. It's also important for the policymakers to create long-term deals with producer of this higher grade ore. And they also should consider investing in collecting or processing local scrap metal to boost the recycled steel production. So that would be, I would say, the thing that they can consider to support the transition to green steel. But the pitfalls that they need to be aware of is that it's a common mistake that green hydrogen and renewable energy can be scaled quite quickly and cheaply. It's not gonna happen like that. They should not approve green steel projects without a clear, realistic plan for a steady, affordable supply of renewable energy and hydrogen, which means this project looks good, but is it realistic enough for the resources that we have, for the infrastructure we have? Do we need to upgrade infrastructure before we can approve this green steel project? So they need to be realistic, and they need to not think about, renewable energy just install a solar panel here and wind farm here and we're going to be good. So that perception needs to be removed immediately because that will be so risky. And the second thing is, it's also unrealistic for countries in Southeast Asia where blast furnace is the dominant steelmaking that is heavily reliant on coal, which means it's unrealistic to suddenly switch from mainly coal-based steelmaking to mostly green hydrogen-based steelmaking. In a short to medium term, I think it's wiser to use a mix of steelmaking methods, but they should be careful about solutions that keep them dependent on fossil fuel for too long. So rather than from coal-based steelmaking straight into green steelmaking, it's quite unrealistic because the amount of effort, investment, and challenges that you have to carry, it is wiser if you can do that gradually, but consistently, and not to fall into the trap where you keep yourself dependent on fossil fuel for too long.
That kind of begs this question of, in your view, right now, do you think the focus on green steel is more about climate goals, or is it being driven more by desire to secure energy independence to dominate future markets?
The core of the green steel movement is driven mainly by the urgent climate goals because we know now that steelmaking is one of the biggest polluters globally. But as we're moving away from coal-based steel, countries are reducing dependence on the volatile fossil fuel market. So in that sense, we do reduce the dependence on fossil fuel and increase energy independence. But in doing so, I would say a new dynamic challenge reappear because green steel relies on high-grade iron ore and renewable energy, which means you're opening up yourself to a new game of reliance where you have to compete with other countries for the same resources, for the same material. And same goes for renewable energy. You also have to compete with other countries who also wants to get the same material for building the solar panels so they can build more renewable energy. So it energy is a complex challenge for a reason. Its core is we want to reduce emission, but once we open that kind of worm, it just start to spread out everywhere.
Let me go one step back and just ask a simple question. Is there money to be made in green steel? If a company can do this right, are they going
Mhm.
to benefit? Are they gonna get the return on their investment that makes this worth the trouble?
That's why I like the word if we do this right.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So under the premise of if we get this right, then I do see the huge benefit of it because knowing that we need green hydrogen, we need iron ore, and we need the infrastructure to process this iron ore and produce like a suitable material so it can be used to make green steel. I see there's integration between nations who produce the iron ore and the nation who processes the iron ore. If they do it separately, if they do it separately, and nation who have abundant resource of renewable energy like Middle East and Australia. So I've seen there's the integration of a future green corridor, if that could be labeled as that, where these countries work together and become like a superpower for becoming the main supplier of green steel in the market.
But that gets that over reliance aspect that we talked about earlier that causes an
Yes.
additional
Yeah.
problem potentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe you could paint a picture of how it could truly work, if we have, whether it's a green corridor or, this sort of ecosystem, and the sort of industries that would spring up from that, and the kind of new technologies and implementation that we would have if there's actually green steel available. Let's be dreamers and utopians. If things were absolutely perfect, paint a
Mhm.
picture of our beautiful new future we have in store.
If let's say
Mhm.
ideally I would say because we reduce one of the biggest polluters globally, then the future would be so much cleaner, and then we could have a healthier living for everyone. And we talk about the green corridors where country rich in iron ore, renewable energy can partner with nation that use a lot of steel. And as what Jordan said, that could solve the dependency or reliance problem because each country needs each other to work together. And if all countries are included in this transition, so developing nation won't be left behind. So they have support for technology, green funding, fair carbon policy, and they can jump straight into cleaner technologies and to build modern and sustainable industry that can compete globally.
Just to add to that too, if we get to that like utopian, future, that would mean then that we would have so much, talk about the energy abundance. We would have so much renewable energy to make all that
Yep.
green steel, which means we had already covered a lot of different issues that are, plaguing us now. So a solid foundation for all the issues that we're trying to solve.
If we do it right, yeah, that's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then maybe let me pull us a little bit backwards.
Yeah,
So,
go ahead. You can.
Don't be a realist. Don't be a.
When I talk about energy transition, right, I always say that, it's important to understand not just where we are transitioning from. We can have a utopian future where the world is powered by clean energy and everything that we do has bare minimum environmental footprint. In fact, we might even be living with nature, not say living back in nature. That's probably not something we want, but living with nature is something that we want to achieve. But we should also not forget where we are coming from. Today, as of now, still we are 80% dependent on fossil fuel on just about everything that we do. And we should not forget that there's a reason why we are doing that. And there's a reason why fossil fuel has gained its dominance and also the fundamental importance and the fundamental drivers in our economic development. Maybe not so much for the advanced economies anymore, but if you look at the emerging economy or by United Nations definition, least developed countries, they still need to develop before we put on the environmental burden on them to say, hey, now you guys need to decarbonize and you guys need to transition. I think the most important part about, whether we talk about green steel energy transition is to make sure that we bring the right steel at the right cost to them so that they can have affordable housing. And then we can look at how they make decarbonize the rest of the world.
So yeah, we've got our optimistic, futuristic, utopian vision. We've got our realistic path to get there that is going to be filled with roadblocks and challenges and lots of ugly stuff, but there's no choice. We got to keep going. So that's what we'll try and do, and try and connect all the dots between all the people who are trying to make this happen. And we're going to get through it one way or another. So thank you so much for helping us understand this, Hasliza. It's been a
Thank you
great
so much.
it's been a great conversation. Oh yeah, and hopefully we can have you back again and again to try
I
and
look forward to. Yeah, I look forward to. Maybe we're talking about the rainbow version of the hydrogen. Who knows?
I like it. Yeah.
Or the rabbit hole Australian politics. I'm
yeah.
I'm happy either way.
Okay. Two
Do it all.
future episodes right there. All right. It's a deal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hasliza.
And thanks, Victor and Jordan. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Thank everyone who has been listening or watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, share this episode with a friend, and leave a comment to let us know what you think. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks again, everybody.